The house was quiet, almost oppressively so. Every corner seemed to echo her solitude, the ticking of the old clock on the wall sounding louder than usual. She sat in her favorite chair, the one her husband used to occupy too, feeling the emptiness settle like a heavy blanket around her shoulders. Her hands trembled as they rested on her lap. She wanted to cry out, to call someone, but the words never came. Only silent tears escaped, trailing down her cheeks and leaving small, cold tracks in the dim light. The night pressed close. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, but inside, only the sound of her own shallow breathing kept her company. She felt invisible, abandoned not just by people, but by the very life that had once been full and warm. She thought of the meals left untouched, the bed that now seemed too large, too empty. Every object in the room reminded her of absence, of the one who had been her companion for decades. The ache in her chest was deep, a weight that seemed almost unbearable. In the silence she whispered a prayer. Not words of strength or hope, just a quiet, trembling, "God, I am here, I am still here." The walls did not answer, the night did not change, and yet in that stillness, her heart ached with both grief and a faint yearning for a presence she could not yet feel. She closed her eyes, and suddenly she was back in a smaller, brighter time. She could see him laughing at the breakfast table, sunlight catching the silver in his hair. The sound of his voice seemed so near, and yet the room around her remained silent. Memories came in fragments. The touch of his hand on hers during long walks, the quiet evenings spent reading together, the comfort of knowing someone always waited for her at home. Each memory was both a balm and a sting, sweetness and pain intertwined. She traced the edges of an old photograph, the one where they had smiled together at their 50th wedding anniversary. How many mornings had begun with his smile? How many nights had ended with his hand brushing hers? The house was full of these echoes, yet he was gone. Her heart ached with longing. She whispered his name, almost afraid to speak it aloud, as if saying it too loud would shatter the fragile memory. She clutched the photograph closer, pressing it to her chest, trying to hold on to the warmth of what had been. The quiet of the present pressed harder against her memories. Each echo reminded her of the absence, yet in them she also sensed the depth of a love that had shaped her life. A tear slipped down, warm and silent, mourning the past while her body remained in the cold present. She walked through the house, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. Each room whispered memories. His chair at the dining table, the blankets folded in the guest room, the small notes he used to leave in the kitchen. All these things, once ordinary, now felt like ghostly reminders of a life abruptly paused. The air smelled faintly of old wood and lavender, but even familiar scents brought no comfort. She pressed her hand against the doorframe, imagining the warmth of his presence, imagining the laughter that had once filled these rooms. The emptiness was loud. Even mundane routines like pouring a cup of tea or watering the plants felt hollow. She moved through the house mechanically, each task echoing the absence around her. The walls seemed closer, the shadows longer, and the silence more profound with every step. For a moment she sat on the edge of the bed, letting the weight of the quiet settle over her. There was no one to ask how her day had been, no hand to hold, no voice to fill the void. The emptiness pressed in, sharp and relentless. She remembered the days when friends would call, inviting her to gatherings, offering small smiles and words of encouragement. Now the phone stayed silent, the mail empty, and visits had grown rare. People had moved on, busy with their lives, leaving her to face the days alone. Loneliness deepened as she realized how fragile human presence could be. Invitations stopped, calls were forgotten, and she felt herself fading from the lives of those she had once loved. The world felt distant, a place she no longer belonged to. Even familiar faces in the neighborhood seemed to avert their eyes, polite but distant. She walked slowly past them, trying to catch a moment of connection, but the world moved on without noticing her grief. At night, she often wondered if her existence had become invisible. The absence of friends, once a minor sting, now felt like a constant companion, mirroring the absence of her husband. The ache inside her was more than sadness. It was a weight that pressed on her chest. Each breath reminded her of what was missing, even when the house was warm. Her heart felt cold. She tried to distract herself with small tasks, but the loneliness followed her everywhere. Washing dishes, folding laundry, walking through the empty rooms, each action echoed the quiet despair. Her eyes lingered on the empty chair by the window, the one where he had once sat reading the newspaper. She could almost hear the rustle of pages, almost see him glance up and smile. Almost. Some nights she lay awake listening to the wind, to the distant hum of the street, and to her own heartbeat. It was a rhythm of solitude, unbroken and unyielding, a reminder that life had changed. Days blended into nights, and nights into endless quiet. She felt herself sinking, her energy spent on mere existence. Small joys felt unreachable, laughter a distant memory, hope a fragile flicker she struggled to find. Even her prayers felt mechanical at times, words without life, whispered into an unresponsive silence. She questioned why her life had become so heavy, so stripped of companionship, so lonely. She remembered the things she had loved, gardening, reading aloud, sharing tea with friends. Now these joys seemed muted, distant, as though a fog had settled over her spirit. Her eyes lingered on old photographs, on small mementos of a life rich with love. And yet, the weight of absence pressed harder than ever, making her wonder if she could endure much longer. She closed her eyes tightly, lips moving in a whisper only she could hear. "Please, just be near me," she murmured. Days had passed, and her prayers seemed to vanish into an empty sky. No warmth, no comfort, no response, just silence. Her faith, once steady like a river, now felt fragile, teetering like a candle flame in the wind. She wondered if God had turned away, or if he had forgotten her pain. Each unanswered prayer deepened the loneliness, leaving her adrift in a sea of quiet despair. The night stretched endlessly. She waited for a sign, a feeling, a voice, anything that could remind her she was not alone. But the stillness remained, heavy, as if the world itself had pressed pause on her suffering. Yet even in the silence, there was a whisper within, a faint, persistent presence that refused to be ignored, a subtle thread of hope tangled among the grief. She held the small photograph in her hand, tracing the edges with trembling fingers. Their smiles, frozen in time, were both comforting and unbearable. Memories surged. Anniversaries, morning coffee, quiet conversations, moments that were now impossibly gone. Every object in the house seemed to hold a memory. The clock they had wound together, the teacup he always chose, the scarf she knitted for him one winter. Ordinary things had become gateways to sorrow, each one a reminder of what she had lost. She closed her eyes and let the tears fall, unashamed, unrestrained. In those moments, grief became a physical presence, sitting beside her, pressing close, making her heart ache with longing. Even as the pain pressed deep, there was a strange solace in remembering. Love had existed here, it had been real, and though the absence was vast, so too was the depth of what had been shared. She felt small, almost invisible. "Does anyone see me?" she whispered to herself. The house was quiet, the world moved on, and she wondered if her life still had meaning. Loneliness morphed into self-doubt, twisting gently but persistently around her heart. Her reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar, eyes weary, shoulders slumped, lips tired. Was this the person she had become, reduced to shadows of memories and longing? She clutched her hands together, trying to feel her own presence, trying to remind herself that she still existed, still mattered, still deserved to be loved. But even in that effort, the question lingered, am I truly seen? The shadows pressed closer. Doubt gnawed quietly, subtly, like a whisper she could not silence. Yet somewhere beneath the heaviness there remained a flicker, a faint light daring to persist. She sank to the floor, letting herself collapse under the weight she had carried for so long. Tears streamed freely, shoulders shaking, heart raw. She did not hide, did not shield herself. For once she let herself feel completely, utterly, and vulnerably. No one would see, no one would hear. And yet, in this surrender, there was a release, a strange, bitter comfort in allowing herself to be broken. The night enveloped her like a dark, soft cloak. Her sobs became whispers, whispers became silence. She let the stillness carry her, letting go of the pretense of strength she had clung to. It was a quiet breaking, one that left her spirit open, empty, yet strangely ready, though she did not know for what, for something gentle, unseen, and long-awaited. She sat on the edge of the bed, knees drawn close, whispering a prayer barely louder than her own breath. "Please, don't leave me alone," she murmured. It was not a prayer for miracles or grandeur, only for presence. Her voice cracked, and the room seemed to hold its breath. She had whispered so many prayers, so many wishes, and yet tonight the words felt more fragile than ever. The hope that someone might hear them seemed almost too far to grasp. Tears ran freely down her cheeks, leaving trails of warmth on her cold skin. Each sob carried both sorrow and desperation, as if her very soul had spilled into the quiet night. The shadows around her deepened, but in that darkness she sensed a tremor of expectation, an invisible presence brushing against the edges of her awareness. Her hands, pressed together, shook slightly. She did not ask for comfort, only for him to stay nearby, to remind her that she was not completely abandoned. For a long while, she remained still, her whispered prayer hanging in the air, fragile and true. It was a surrender of weakness, a quiet reaching toward something she could not yet see. The night felt lighter, though nothing in the room had changed. She sensed it first as a warmth in her chest, subtle, like sunlight slipping through closed curtains. Her breath caught, uncertain. Had she imagined it? She stayed still, listening to her own heartbeat, and then another sensation, a quiet steadiness, a reassurance that she was not entirely alone. It was not a sound, not a shape, only a feeling that settled around her shoulders like a protective cloak. Her mind raced, questioning if grief had conjured illusions. Yet the comfort persisted, gentle but undeniable. She felt held, even without a hand, even without a voice. The heaviness in her chest softened just slightly. A tiny part of her heart, the part that had nearly surrendered, began to lift, tasting relief she had not known in months. She breathed slowly, each inhalation seeming to draw the presence closer, each exhalation releasing a bit of sorrow she had carried alone. For the first time in so long, she allowed herself to remain still, feeling the quiet intimacy of being seen without words, being accompanied without ceremony. The sensation grew, not forceful, but enveloping. It was as if a gentle hand rested upon her heart, invisible yet undeniable. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to lean into it, to feel the soft, steady rhythm of a presence that would not leave. Her shoulders, heavy for months, relaxed almost imperceptibly. The loneliness, though not erased, became bearable. There was a companion here, patient and unwavering, waiting without judgment. Images of past pain and grief floated up, but they no longer pressed as sharply against her spirit. Each memory was acknowledged and held, rather than a wound reopened. A quiet sense of safety settled into her chest, a subtle certainty that though the world had turned away, she remained seen, she remained loved. Tears spilled again, but now they carried a different quality, soft, cleansing, not entirely sorrowful. There was release, and in that release, a whisper of peace. She lingered in the embrace, letting the invisible comfort seep into the parts of her that had long been hardened by absence and despair. Morning had not yet come, but within her, a quiet shift began. The sorrow remained, yet it was no longer jagged and sharp. It blended with something tender, something that felt like hope. The pain softened, as if each heartbeat carried a fraction of relief. She noticed the small sounds of the night, the hum of the heater, the creak of the floor, no longer oppressive but gentle companions in her quiet vigil. She breathed in slowly, noticing how much less labored her chest felt. The ache was still there, but it was different now, tempered by the invisible presence that lingered like a soft, unwavering hand. Images of her husband, once a source of raw longing, now carried a warmth that made her smile quietly through tears. Love remained, even in absence. Memory became a gift, not just a wound. For the first time in months, she imagined the possibility of tomorrow without fear, of living without feeling wholly alone. And though she could not see him, she felt him clearly, a steady, quiet presence that transformed grief into a gentle companion. As the night wore on, she began to notice something shift deep within her, a quiet stirring, a subtle renewal that was hard to define but impossible to ignore. The ache in her chest no longer felt overwhelming. Instead, there was a quiet awakening, a pulse of something new, something fragile yet stirring. Her mind wandered to the future for the first time in months. It was not with dread, but with a small, tentative sense of curiosity. What if there were more to life than just sorrow? What if peace, true peace, could still be part of her story? The room felt warmer now, filled with the soft glow of an inner light that had begun to flicker once more. She wasn't certain of the way forward, but she no longer felt like she was drifting aimlessly. She allowed herself to hope, not in grand gestures, but in small, quiet things. A walk in the garden, a shared moment with a friend, a word of comfort. Her spirit felt lighter, as if the weight of grief had shifted, not disappeared, but found a place to rest. There was a new energy in her, slow but steady, like a river gradually carving its way through the landscape, and with it, a profound sense of peace. Silent but deeply rooted, the realization came gently but powerfully. She was not forgotten. She was not invisible. Her life, even in its quietness, had meaning. In the stillness of the night, she reflected on her worth, not through what she had lost, but through what had been given to her. She was cherished, seen, loved, not by those who had left, but by the one who had always been there. A quiet joy stirred in her heart as she remembered her own resilience, the years she had spent nurturing love, supporting family, and living with purpose. She was not defined by the emptiness around her. She was defined by the fullness within her. Though her husband had passed, she was not abandoned by love. His presence had shaped her, yes, but the love that had been cultivated between them was not gone. It lived on in her heart, woven into the fabric of who she was. In this quiet moment, she understood that she was never alone, not truly. Love had always surrounded her, and though it took on a different form now, it remained undiminished. She sat up straighter, her heart lighter, filled with the quiet recognition that her life, in all its simplicity, mattered. She was still here, still loved, still seen. With the first light of dawn, she awoke with a feeling that was new. Fear no longer had its tight grip on her heart. Instead, there was a calm, like the gentle flow of a river at dusk, still and steady. The anxiety that had accompanied her every waking moment seemed to have loosened its hold, leaving space for something softer, more peaceful. As she stood, her feet firmly planted on the ground, she felt more grounded than she had in a long time. There was a quiet assurance in her soul, a knowing that she was held by something greater than her grief, greater than her fears. Her hands were steady as she made her way through the house, not rushing, not burdened, but with purpose. The world outside was still the same, yet she was different. The darkness that had loomed over her for so long was now a distant memory, replaced by a subtle lightness, a soft hope that fluttered in her chest. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh morning air. She was not alone. She was seen, loved, and for the first time in a long while, she was at peace with that truth. As the day unfolded, small moments of joy began to seep into her life. A bird sang outside the window, its melody soft but uplifting. The sun, warm and golden, filtered through the curtains, filling the room with light. She smiled, genuinely, without effort. It was a small smile, one that trembled at first, unsure, but then it grew a little more confident. It felt unfamiliar at first, like a part of her she had forgotten existed. Her heart stirred gently, recognizing this joy, this new life that was quietly taking root. It wasn't the explosive joy of the past, but something quieter, more enduring, a joy grounded in simple things, in being alive. She sat by the window, watching the world outside, noticing how the trees swayed in the breeze, how the flowers bloomed with quiet persistence. There was beauty in the ordinary, a grace she hadn't noticed in her sorrow, and as the day wore on, her smile remained, a small sign that she was opening to life again, allowing the smallest joys to touch her heart. This gentle joy was the beginning of something new, something that, though fragile, was nonetheless real. When she opened her eyes to the new day, something was different. The room was the same, the quiet morning unchanged, but she felt different. It wasn't a grand shift, but a subtle transformation, a shift within her heart, within her spirit. The weight of the past few months didn't disappear, but it no longer had the power to consume her. She had somehow found a way to carry it with her, without letting it define her. She stood by the window, gazing out at the world, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel trapped in her own grief. There was space now, space to breathe, to move, to live. The world hadn't changed. The seasons still passed. The same faces still walked by. But she had. She had allowed herself to heal, to begin again. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She was ready for this new day, for whatever it might bring, because she no longer faced it alone. Today felt different. She felt different, and that was enough. The days that followed were still filled with their own challenges, moments of grief, moments of joy. But through it all, the peace that had begun in her heart remained. It was not the absence of struggle, but the presence of something deeper, something that held her steady in the midst of it all. She woke up each day with a quiet certainty. Though the world was not perfect, though her life had changed in ways she could not undo, there was something that remained unchanged, the presence of love, the knowledge that she was never alone. Her heart no longer ached with the same raw intensity. The grief had its place, but it no longer defined her every moment. She had found a way to live with it, to carry it without being crushed by it, and in the quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded away, she felt the gentle touch of grace. It was not an overpowering presence, but a steady one, like the constant rhythmic beating of her heart. She was still here, she was still loved. And though the world would continue with its struggles, she knew she had found something that would never leave, peace that remained, gently, quietly, in her soul.